Hello, and welcome to the Admittedly podcast. My name is Thomas Caleel. I'm the former director of MBA admissions and financial aid for my alma mater, the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. In this podcast, I don't promise easy answers or quick fixes, but I will use my decades of experience to help you achieve your education goals. Now let's get started. Welcome to the Admittedly podcast. I'm your host, Thomas Caleel, and today we have a very special guest, a dear friend of mine, Christian Hernandez. Christian is a technologist and experienced venture capitalist. Prior to co-founding 2150, Christian launched White Star Capital, a venture capital fund with over $250 million in assets under management and a global presence. Previously, Christian held leadership roles through the scale-up phase of some of the world's largest technology companies, notably as head of international business development at Facebook and head of new markets at Google. Christian holds a BA in economics from Duke University, an MBA from the Wharton School, and is a young global leader of the World Economic Forum. His personal commitment to sustainability in 2023 is to limit his meat intake to once a week. Christian, really grateful for you taking the time in what I know is a very busy schedule. Very dear friend and somebody who I turn to when I need advice on things and a good perspective. So glad we're having a chance to talk.
Hey, listen, I've been listening to the podcast for some time, so I'm excited to be on it.
Yeah, well, both of us now as parents and having high schoolers, we're deep in this.
Yes, it's taken a more relevance as of late, correct?
Exactly. Well, I want to talk to you about a couple things, but first of all, 2150, what is that? What is this new venture that you're working on?
Yeah, so a couple of years ago, I went to a Princeton executive education event that was paid for by the World Economic Forum at the Climate Center. I was climate curious, but not climate educated. And I walked out of that both scared and excited, scared about the scale of the problem and the fact that me driving a Tesla doesn't solve it at all. And then excited about the fact that the tool of venture could be applied to climate. We needed to innovate in dozens of technologies, hundreds of technologies to attack the problem. And then at that point, this is 4 years ago, very few existed. What we now call climate tech wasn't even a term. So decided to fire myself from my own venture capital fund that I'd founded and launch a new fund called 2150 that focuses specifically on hard to decarbonize industries. So I launched with a couple of Danish friends of mine, or Danish now friends of mine. And we're now, I think, one of the largest venture capital firms focused on climate solutions in Europe.
That's incredible. And I live in California, so we have climate awareness, but at the level you're operating, I think we're far behind. And, so when I think back, sorry to date us, but over 20 years, when I first met you, like the first couple of days at Wharton, you weren't a climate guy, right? You've been I've always known you as like the technology guy. So what was that evolution? What was that progress? And I know coming to Wharton, you were very focused on technology, but was that always what you wanted to do?
Not really. I mean, if we want to go back to my application for college, I thought I wanted to be a pediatric oncologist, which in hindsight is like one of the most depressing jobs or satisfying jobs in the world, right? Cancer of little kids. And it is a family history. My sister had leukemia when she was young. She got cured, so I thought that people like that were amazing.
Yes.
Really, after 2 years of pre-med, realized I was not going to be a doctor. Organic chemistry taught me that pretty harshly. But
it's a very binary decision at that point. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. We'll come back to that because actually the organic chemistry story comes back to my climate reality now in a funny way. But I'd been tinkering with technology since I was a young kid. I was playing with my dad's computer when I was 12, coding and what back then was called BASIC. And I try to hide it. Kind of being a geek back then wasn't exactly cool. Now it seems to be. But I kept on tinkering with technology. I built my first website in 1993. And in a way, by mistake, by chance, ended up in a technology company after college in what became known as a dot-com boom. It was crazy. I mean, like founder was worth 7 billion on paper. I was worth millions on paper at 23, and then I wasn't. It was crazy fun times.
On paper, the most
Um,
important asterisks in your personal balance sheet. I know that well.
exactly, exactly. Yeah, you cannot buy real stuff with paper options. Um, but when I applied to Wharton, yeah, I wanted to stay in technology. It was after dot-com crash. Most of our classmates who had been in technology were running away from it as fast as they could.
Yes.
But I stayed true to that. I think my specific essay for Wharton read that I wanted to stay in wireless technologies, focused on Latin America. And the job I got during my summer internship was in wireless technologies at Microsoft, focused on Latin America. So I think the hardest thing while at Wharton was actually not being attracted by kind of the social herd mentality. Everybody was
Yes.
interviewing for consulting and banking. I knew very clearly I did not want to be a banker, but I did do my own set of interviews for consulting, Bain, McKinsey, etc. You just get swept along with it, but stayed true to it and ended up back at Microsoft after business school, then Google after that, then Facebook after that, and then investing in technology companies. So listen, I mean, I guess I was doing tech before it became sexy, but it's cool to know that geeks are now respected.
And ironically, now most of the students coming and talking to me would do anything to be a computer science geek, right? That's their goal in life, and so you're in very good company. And I think it's very hard sometimes for people outside the business school culture to appreciate. I talk a lot about courage on the podcast. The courage it takes when you are in business school, right? And these cool, sexy, consulting firms and banks, and it's very tempting, right? There's a lot of money being thrown at graduates. You can pay off this mountain of debt that you've accrued. But I remember sitting at Wharton our first year when the dot-com crash happened, and all of the tech, the second year students who had offers from tech companies and consulting companies in tech and banking in tech, just getting their offers rescinded. And so what were you thinking at that moment? Because the path that you wanted to take essentially vaporized almost overnight.
And I mean, in hindsight, I had another thing going against me is that I was not a U.S. citizen. So,
Right.
'03, not a lot of tech companies hiring MBAs, and not a lot of companies hiring foreign MBAs. And I think Microsoft, I wasn't excited about the size of Microsoft. I like small companies and I like the hyper
Mm-hmm.
growth cycle of companies. Um, but Microsoft was hiring MBAs, and my summer internship was amazing. I got to hang out at Bill Gates' house. They market Seattle to you during the summer, which is
Love
great, except in the winter you realize it's a bit different. Um,
that.
but the offer was a great offer to work in this new fledgling business. There was a startup inside of Microsoft launching what would eventually become the first generation smartphones, way before the iPhone. And so it was kind of a startup with the benefits of the big company scale. It involved the move to Seattle, which was not necessarily a first choice, but I mean, a bunch of my friends from the same year ended up going to Google in 2003. Google was definitely not hiring, at least not foreign MBAs. They were hiring foreign engineers. So just finding the right fit, and there was not that many options. But I wanted to stay in the U.S. and I wanted to stay in technology.
Great. And I think so. The very interesting thing here is that you had this determination, you had this focus, and I get a lot of students, a lot of parents saying to me, "How does my 17-year-old know what they want to do?" Right? And I always tell them, okay, well, we want to think about what they're passionate about, what they care about, and then equip them with tools that allow them to either stay that path or change, right? And it seems like you've done some changing over your career and flexibility. Um, what would you say to these students or parents in terms of preparing yourself for flexibility, preparing yourself? You took a large career change later in your career, right? It might be surprising to some people.
Yeah, I think so. When I was at Princeton, I found out the stat, which kind of I found a bit sad. So Princeton's amazing, right? It's like this research university. You're literally studying in the classroom where Einstein used to teach. Surrounded by I don't know how many Nobel Prizes, and something like 94% of the graduating undergrad class goes to consulting and banking. So the
Yeah.
best of the best of the best, who wrote that essay about how passionate they were about nuclear fusion or whatever it might have been, just yeah, they have the debt or they have the incentive to go do consulting and banking. And for some, academia might not be right, or becoming a PhD might not be right, but for others, it could be. And so the encouragement for them to be able to take that path in a society that still values kind of the monetary component a bit much. I think for me, it was a combination of, on one side, flexibility, and on the other side, kind of a meandering direction in which I wanted to go. I knew kind of where I thought I wanted to end, but I was flexible about how to get there. It still sits in my office. When I was a teenager, no, I was 21, I just graduated college. I went on backpacking to Croatia, and I bought a poster that has a Latin phrase on it, navigare necessis est. Forgive my Latin. It's actually something that one of the emperors said to their fleet during a storm. They didn't want to go out and sail, and he said, navigare necessis est. To sail is necessary. But I kind of mistook that quote and applied it to my own life as keep a hand on the steering wheel, right? Know which way the direction the boat's going to go, but allow yourself to tack. You're never going to go in a straight line when you're sailing a boat, but know the end destination. And I actually had, I actually wrote myself a paper when I was applying to business school around that phrase about stay the direction, but know that it's never going to be a straight line path. An example of that is I was at Microsoft. I was living in Seattle. I wanted to come back to Europe, where I got to high school. So I applied and got a role in Paris. And in Microsoft culture, that was a big negative. Like, why would you go from like the center of everything, headquarters, out to the field, as they called it? And just didn't understand it. For me, for my own career development, being back in Europe was actually part of that. And I wanted to be in the field. Yep. In the traditional
I remember that. I remember the conversations around that we had.
But in the typical career path of Microsoft, you don't do that. You try to go from the field back to headquarters. That's the aspiration. So it's actually planning your own trail and then kind of try and stay true to it, knowing that it is going to change over and over again. And actually the fun part is that it does change.
It does. And again, going back to courage, having the courage to buck the trend, right? Go against the conventional wisdom that worked out very well for you. And it was a set of personal values, right? This is where I want to be. This is where I want to be long term. This is the environment I want to be in.
I'm actually having dinner with my parents tonight, and I'm going to talk about a fun story. So I had two strong conversations with them when I was at college. The second conversation was about the fact that I wanted to drop pre-med, and I ended up graduating in economics because that's the only thing I could finish in 4 years. But I was saying computer science on the side and taking technology class on the side and coding websites. That one they were very supportive of. There's no doctors in the family, so they never really understood why I wanted to be a doctor. They're like, yeah, as long as you're passionate about what you want to do. The first conversation was after my first semester at Duke. I'd moved to Durham, North Carolina from Paris, so a bit of a culture shock. I came home and told them that I decided to transfer to Georgetown because I liked DC and I liked the big city. And they asked why. They could have been supportive, but they asked for the logic behind it. And I said, well, there's better partying at Georgetown than there is at Duke. And then in a quite direct way, my dad told me to shut up and go back to Durham.
He's a very wise man, your father.
So courage with some direction from people you trust around you is probably the right way to go.
Absolutely. And so let me ask you a personal question, right? You have this wonderful experience, right? You have this great education pedigree. You're doing amazing, cutting edge, super cool climate tech. I mean, you're like way out ahead of the curve there. What are your own children thinking? Like and how do you support them in their education goals?
Yeah, so we're in the UK, and they're in British schools. British schools have a positive and a negative that you specialize really early. Like you make a decision at 14 that you're going to drop some lessons. My oldest will never take a history class if he can in his life again. And then you specialize even more. So effectively, you only do 3, maybe 4 APs at A levels by the time you graduate. So that means you've gone super deep on those subjects by the time you enter college, which is great. But you've lost the breadth of all the other stuff, which I could argue is also a positive. The liberal arts system does have its benefits. I could never have switched in the UK from medicine to economics like that. I would have had to start from scratch, literally. So each of them is different. My oldest is also a geek, and he's pretty set on some sort of science career. He actually wants to be an astrobiologist. I had to look up what that meant.
Astrobiologist.
It is a thing.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a study of life in other planets and what human life will have to look like to survive in other planets. And I actually now subscribe to the NASA astrobiology newsletter. It's the thing. I just didn't know it was a thing.
Wow. Okay.
So this summer, him and his youngest brother went to space camp, which was awesome for them, because obviously the oldest one wants to go study aliens, and the little one decided he wants to be a rocket engineer to build the rockets to take his brother to space.
Now, is that a brotherly competition thing? Like, if I can send my brother into space, I won't have to deal with him anymore, or is there a good working
No,
relationship?
I think it's a good work relationship. The
Okay,
middle
good.
daughter wants nothing to do with space. Like she's like, I'm never going to space, even if it becomes really cheap and affordable. So she, I mean, stereotypical, and like that my daughter didn't go to a space camp, but it was her choice that she didn't want to go. She has no idea, and I think for her, for example, a liberal arts system would probably work well for her to explore different avenues. I don't. I always joke that she's going to change the world. I just don't know if it's going to be for the good or for bad. Um, she probably needs that breadth of opportunities to figure out if she want to be a lawyer,
Right.
does she want to be a human rights activist, does she want to be, I don't know, a businesswoman. Um, and then so for her, we're probably guiding her more towards a US style system, or sorry, she's very excited about the US style system. She went to visit a couple of universities in California recently. Um, my oldest wants to go deep into science as quickly as he can, and he never wants to do history again. So for him, probably the British system will be better. And the only thing we can do
Great.
for them right now is exposure to both different systems, but also different experiences like space camp, like um, summer biology camp at Penn that I just discovered. So they can actually start realizing what it actually means to be a biologist professionally. It's not all fun and games. It's a lot of time in the lab.
A lot of tedium. Exactly. And I think it's very interesting because, people wrestle a lot with what you do with your children over the summer, right? And there's a balance between, between these summer programs, right? And making them make sense in your overall strategy, right? So for the boys, it sounds like space camp was really an integral part of them getting deep into something that they think they like, and it has deepened their passion, right? But for somebody like your daughter, there is an element of kind of looking around, right? And thinking about, okay, what do I do? How do I get exposure to different things? And you and I have talked about this, being a little bit careful about the summer academic programs and not overweighting in that, because the universities are pushing back on that a little bit, right? Obviously, if they're going to the British system, it's the British admission system is completely different. But on the US system, the universities are realizing that there's a strong element of privilege in that,
Yeah,
and not, coming in with just expensive summer program after expensive summer program, and looking at what we're doing and how we're growing. So
I'm laughing because the conversation we were in Florida last week with my whole family and my wife. We went to the restaurant when my wife had been a waitress back in the day, and she goes, "You kids need to be waitressing here for at least one summer or at least 1 month. All the like space camp and entitlement. You need to realize what it actually is worth to earn a buck."
that's very funny, because the conversation I had 2 weeks ago with my wife, who worked her way through, she went to a very good undergraduate and graduate program in Toronto, and she worked her way through. She bartended, she served, she worked very long hours. And she said that to me because my oldest did an internship with a real estate investment group. And she's like, okay, listen, next summer, none of this cushy, my dad got me a fancy internship stuff. You're working minimum wage. So you learn this, exactly what your wife said. So I think these kids are in for a very different summer next year.
Exactly. Exactly.
Send,
Or I mean, just work retail, right? So yeah, like if my
yeah,
daughter who's brilliant to
exactly.
music wants to play in a record shop, go work in a record shop. But I have to know what an hourly wage looks like.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a very good point, right? It can be anything, right? I mean, I remember growing up working. I started working in a barn, which, like cleaning tack, feeding horses at 5 in the morning, throwing hay bales around in the heat, 110-degree summer heat. And then, went down and took the train downtown and worked in the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, back when they had open outcry pits, which was truly unique. I mean, you'd be on the floor at like 6 a.m. getting shoved around by these former professional football players. But I think there is value, a lot of value in working. There's a lot of value in learning, the value of money. But as you said, you can be flexible. You like music, great. Go work in a music store. Go be go immerse yourself in what it is that you like, and see if you do like it, because there's no harm in discovering, what, I don't like this, and course correcting, right? You can do that before you even get to college and decide that organic chemistry is your nemesis, right? So
Oh yeah, so we have to go back to the organic chemistry story. So
Yes.
um, uh, I dropped out of Orgo during the main semester because I was definitely not going to pass, and I took what we used to be called Orgo for Dummies over the summer. It was just Orgo for the summer course,
Right.
and my professor was called Eric Toon, and this will be important in a second. And even though I was taking kind of Orgo for Dummies, I still paid this tutor, this guy who just graduated from his PhD and had gone to Harvard, who would come back and teach us Orgo Dummies, kind of extra tutorials. Um, and how it all links back to my life now is that Bill Gates founded this fund called Breakthrough Energy Ventures. It's probably one of the best known funds in climate tech. The CEO, the Chief Technology Officer of Breakthrough Energy Ventures, is Eric Toon, and the young
That's
PhD,
great.
the young PhD who came back to help me out is the managing partner, Carmichael Roberts. So my life of Orgo has got a full circle, and I have to thank Eric Toon when I see him the next for not letting me become a doctor and allowing me to go down this path.
I love that. What a wonderfully small world. I want to be respectful of your time, which you've been very gracious in sharing. As we kind of wrap this up, what are, and not related to admissions, what are three things that all of us should be focused on in terms of climate technology, climate change, and doing our part besides driving a Tesla?
Yeah, so I do this with my kids all the time. So if I asked my kids or the average person on the street what they could individually do to impact climate change, they would probably say drive an EV, take less flights, and eat less red meat.
Okay.
Which is true. At an individual level, your carbon footprint is influenced by the flights you take and the demand that we drive for meat. And yes, switching to EVs is good. But at an individual level, you need billions of us to be doing that for us to move the needle. For example, so everybody focuses on aviation fuel. That's only 2% of world greenhouse gas emissions. 50% of world greenhouse gas emissions is our buildings, how we build, how we heat, how we cool. And then the industries, the stuff that we make to consume as inside our homes, inside our offices. And that receives a fraction, that receives like 12% of all climate tech money. And that's kind of what we're focused on, right? These hard to abate problems that actually drive the biggest impact. And it's not going to be the Tesla, or it's not going to be the electric bike. It's actually how to make cement that has a lower carbon footprint, how to actually cool or houses more efficiently. So educate yourself on that. We actually have a Climate 101 paper on our website that just kind of helps lay out the problem itself. And then you realize the enormity of it. This is not, yes, an individual action helps, but it actually, the biggest action you can take for climate is your vote. Because it's actually policy and politicians at a national scale that need to define laws, incentives like the IRA in the US that will actually drive the necessary change and the speed that we need. We need to halve our emissions by 2030. Unlikely that's going to happen. And we need to have them again by 2040 and half them again by 2050 to get to the Paris numbers. And that's the second thing, is realizing that even if we hit the Paris numbers, so keeping the increase in temperature to 1.5 degrees, the world will change. So at 1.5 degrees, the IPCC, which is this Council of Scientists, believes that the global water level, even if we hit that number, will increase by 0.4 meters. If we don't hit that level and we go up to 2 degrees, it'll increase by 0.6 meters. So even if we hit the Paris numbers, there's still a bunch of actions that we'll have to take very quite quickly to start adapting to the changes that will come to the planet. And this summer has been a great example of just how quickly it happens, the change that happens, floods in Beijing and heat waves all over the place, hurricanes in California.
Exactly.
And then the third point, and the deeper you go into climate, the more depressed you should be. The final point is what I'm doing about it, which is having agency. The idea that you can actually have an impact in the work that you do, in the startup you create, in the job that you decide to do. So I feel, listen, I might not solve it, but at least I'm doing something about it. And so that carries weight and responsibility, but it also makes me feel good that I'm taking action.
Absolutely, you're putting the rest of us to shame, and we'll make sure to link to the paper you mentioned. We'll put links to your website and to the paper in the show notes. One quick question: you talked about buildings and everything going into buildings that is a major contributor to climate change. Is that something can you retrofit? And I know I'm very ignorant on this. Can you retrofit those, or is it something that needs to start kind of now, like NEOM in Saudi Arabia, where they're kind of just building something completely new?
There's both new build and retrofits. In the developed world, it's mostly about making our existing buildings more efficient. Mm-hmm. And that could be something as simple as insulation, double pane windows, heat pumps. Heat pumps are honestly magical, the physics of them. The majority of the surface area that has yet to be built, the megacities of the future, are mostly in the global south. So it's making sure that those solutions are price affordable for the developer in Nigeria, who I bet you is not going to be choosing green cement. They're going to be choosing low-cost cement that does the job. Right. So it's actually having, and we try to invest on both sides, like new builds and retrofits. But yeah, I mean, the single best action you can take is actually installing a heat pump.
Fair enough. Well, Christian, thank you. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, but really to talk to you both as a fellow parent and to learn, because I'm always trying to learn, about what you're doing at 2150. It's fascinating. It's way over my head. I appreciate that. So that's why I asked for the advice. Appreciate you coming on. Look forward to seeing what the kids do in their own academic journey. I'm sure I'll hear about it, and look forward to catching up with you again soon.
Fair enough. And I'll just give you one more anecdote in case she wants to edit this in. So we talked about courage earlier. And I think if I was thinking about courageous decisions once in school, it was taking two courses, one in undergrad, one in business school, that were completely orthogonal to what I was studying or what I wanted to do, but actually opened up doors and insights into stuff I never would have learned. One was a literature graduate level course at Duke on Latin American literature taught by a fairly socialist professor, which talked about my part of the world and a lot of the conflict, but forced me to read some books I never would have read, right? Communist guerrillas and their books. And it was me, like the neoliberal posh kid, fighting against these graduate level literature students who were very, very leftist about right and wrong, but actually just having that, being able to understand the other side. And so the ability to, university is a magical place where you're allowed to do that, and you're encouraged to do that. So, and then the second class was our warden, which it was actually a strategy class with a professor who's now retired. He taught strategy through chess. He actually made us play chess, and he taught us grandmaster strategies about thinking about the fact that it's not about the pawn, it's about using the pawn to get to the next move. So always thinking in strategy about the moves that come after. And listen, all my other friends, and you included, were taking advanced corp finance. I was not. I was taking a strategy through chess class, which was orthogonal, but also taught me a valuable lesson about how to think about 2 steps forward. So it's the one time in your life when you're encouraged to take risks, have the courage to do that.
Agreed. And in fairness, I did not do well in advanced corporate finance, which is why I love grade non-disclosure. I was helping build out the communications department and taking the entrepreneurship through acquisition courses, which were much more fun. So thank you, Christian. Thank you for joining us today. Please take a moment to subscribe to the Admittedly podcast and download this episode. I welcome you to share your thoughts and questions with me. You can find us on social media at Admittedly Podcast. I look forward to continuing our journey.